Eliot Spitzer, and do you have an immigrant story?
I think everybody in New York has an immigrant story. One of my favorite stories is that Eleanor Roosevelt, when she addressed the Daughters of the American Revolution, which was a group that believed its members had come over on the Mayflower, and so they go way, way back. She addressed them and said, fellow immigrants. We're all immigrants here in one way or another. In my case, my dad is the first member of my family who's born here. He came over and through Ellis Island, or his parents and his older brother came through Ellis Island. He was born here and grew up in the Lower East Side. But that is typical of New York City. It is what makes this place diverse, exciting, eclectic. It is the sort of integration of all of the cultures, the viewpoints that is what makes New York bubble and explode, and it's just a great place. Well, the Comptroller is, at one level, the chief fiscal officer of the city. That sounds very dry and kind of boring almost. What you do is oversee the money. You oversee the budget to make sure that the money goes where it's supposed to go, that the budget is in balance. You oversee the pension funds, $137 billion. That's a lot of money that you have to invest, that you can direct in certain ways to be supportive of infrastructure, housing construction, education. There are many different ways to use that pool of $137 billion and use it in the capital markets to influence corporate governance, a whole range of issues. And then you do audits of the city to make sure that things are working the way they're supposed to work. It's an office with expansive jurisdiction that has not been fully taken advantage of until now. And much as when I got to the Attorney General's office, I said we can do more with what is here, I want to do the same thing to the Comptroller's office.
Great. Well, you mentioned investing, and you also mentioned, there's more that can be done with this position. As African immigrants, we're wondering what is your message in this campaign as you started probably a little bit late. So what's your message as you're reaching out to Black and immigrant communities? Would you be reaching out to coming out to one of our African mosques and churches before September 10th?
Right. Well, I would say this. I started late in terms of the calendar. I did not announce I was running until July 7, just a few weeks ago. But I started very early in terms of creating a record and acting on behalf of immigrants here in New York City. If you look at what I did as Attorney General, where I not only protected immigrants in terms of wages, in terms of the actual legal structure that affects immigrants, the effort to get driver's licenses for undocumented immigrants was perhaps at that moment one of the most important efforts to protect immigrants and make immigrants part of our economy, our political structure. And while every fight was not a victorious fight, a successful fight, we undertook the hardest, most important battles for the immigrant community. And so I think the record I have in government says to immigrants of all sorts, from any continent, any ethnicity, that what I stand for is what I've done. This is not a campaign based upon promises that might or might not be effectuated. So I'm very proud of that record, and yes, I've been campaigning in churches, in every religious denomination, saying to the immigrant community, my voice is the one that you should support in terms of the effort to really create a New York City that where you can succeed.
Would you be coming out to any of our African mosque churches?
I am sure I have been, I'm sure I will be, and I look forward to doing so. The answer is yes, with the following caveat. I think the pension funds really should be invested here. In terms of international business, New York is certainly the North American capital of international business. I'm not sure we can any longer say it's the global capital, but it is certainly one of the 4 or 5 major global finance and trade centers, and we need to keep it that way. And so we do business here. We have every possible company, nation, sector represented. We need to make sure that that is the case. In terms of the pension funds, which are where the Comptroller has greater capacity to be an active participant, I think the objective is to use the funds throughout New York City, which means investing in the immigrant communities to make sure that immigrants here have access to capital, to make sure that businesses here that people want to begin are not starved of the capital they need. And I think that is probably the best use of the capital that the Comptroller controls.
Well, right now the agencies, unfortunately, have not they have not reached out. They have, and we being the community also is kind of close knit as well. So as you be evaluating agencies on how the impact of the funds that you're getting, how would you ensure that they're also reaching out to the underserved communities like our African communities? How what do you envision putting in place for different agencies, not just for Sandy, but health insurance, the healthcare reform, the health exchanges are coming through, when it comes to judiciary and many of the other city agencies under city services. How would you evaluate agencies on reaching out to the underserved communities?
Well, again, this is something that the Comptroller has a responsibility to audit, to look at, to examine. Something, again, look at my record. As Attorney General and Governor, we did it. So I'm not worried about needing to say to people, trust me, I will do it. I say to them, look at my record in terms of who I appointed, who I brought into government, how we handled the appointments and the responsibilities in the AG's office, the cases we made, and what we did as governor in terms of minority hiring, in terms of minority contracting, in terms of the focus we put on all that. It's something that I will do with the levers of power that the Comptroller's office gives to you, which is you look at every agency and you sit down with them and you say, why is it that your contracts are not properly distributed across the entirety of New York City? What program do you have in place? So this is an issue of good management. Very often in campaigns, people suddenly realize that it's an issue, and so they say they're going to create new offices, they're going to create new layers of bureaucracy. None of that works. What works is the person who's responsible caring enough to actually manage effectively and make it happen. And that's what I did as Attorney General, that's what I did as Governor, and so I think that is the record that I rest upon. I don't need to say I'm creating new offices, new mandates, new this, new that. Just doing it, as the Nike commercial, just do it, is what it comes down to.
Great. Do you find that the community and the Comptroller, it's really surprising, not just our African community, but it sounds like throughout the city, folks don't really know what the Comptroller does. How would you connect community leaders and community organizations with your office? Is there any kind of community outreach that this office either currently has, or that you plan on, really connecting the two?
Well, I think right. Nobody knows what the Comptroller's office does. I did Jimmy Fallon's show, and he did a kind of a funny skit where he passed cards out and asked people what the Comptroller's office was, and the closest we got was somebody who thought the Comptroller determined which airplanes landed when at LaGuardia Airport. And at least we have air traffic controllers. I can see why they thought that. The way you educate the public and you get the public to understand, again, is by sitting down, meeting with people, but by doing. And over time, they will appreciate, oh yeah, the Comptroller's office did that, they did that, they issued this report, they got this return on this investment, or they led this investment. It is a matter of doing over time, and there's an accretion of understanding as time passes. Again, it was that way with the AG's office. When I became Attorney General, nobody had any idea what the Attorney General did or was. People didn't know if you were a military officer or were just kind of some lawyer hanging around in the corner. Over time, people begin to appreciate the job when you do it, and so I think that will be the objective.
Great. And to conclude, immigration reform will trigger its way down into New York City. And right here in New York City, the Congressional Black Caucus leaders, Yvette Clarke and Hakeem Jeffries, are the co-chairs. We have Chuck Schumer, who's the co-chairs at the CBC for immigration. We have Chuck Schumer, who's the chair for immigration in the Senate. As African immigrants, we're looking into how this will play out, and how we can make sure that we're taking part in it. Do you have any thoughts about immigration reform? The diversity visa was taken out, which is a big part for African immigrants. Do you have any thoughts around that, around immigration reform?
Well, look, I led the effort years ago to provide driver's licenses to undocumented immigrants. This is an issue I've cared about deeply and done everything within the power of the offices I've had to lead an effort to improve the structure of our immigration laws. The problem right now is a very simple one. We have a House of Representatives controlled by Republicans who don't want to pass meaningful immigration reform. It's a very simple block. The answer is to elect more Democrats to the House of Representatives. The problem there is that the gerrymandering that was done, even here in New York, perpetuated a number of Republican seats that should not, by any measure, have been there. That it was the leadership up in Albany that unfortunately acted in a way that was antithetical to, despite all its rhetoric, despite all the pounding of their chests for immigration reform, at the moment they could have done something, which was to actually help us elect more Democrats. They failed. And so I think that is where the rubber meets the road. That is where people have to explain what they did. And at this moment, there's a Republican House that is a roadblock, and whether they will understand the issue sufficiently remains to be seen.
Where can Africans go to find out more about you and let us know again? Are you going to be coming out to one of our community events?
Absolutely. I'm sure. I'd be amazed if in the many events I've been to, I haven't been to a significant number already. Go to the website, spitzer2013.com, and see what the campaign has been saying. And there is this little thing called Google that permits people to find out more than I probably wanted to know about every piece of my life. And I'm sure if they go there, they'll see a lot about it. And go to the AG website and look at what I did when I was Attorney General. It's all archived. Same thing for when I was Governor.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.